Hi, everyone. Hope you had a really nice lunch today. My name is Ben Tan, and I do public speaking because it scares me. And I think, and I think you should do more things that scare you, because that's how you grow. So, first of all, just a short disclaimer, standard kind of thing. The views expressed in this talk are my own and don't necessarily represent. Some of them might. Let's see. With that out of the way. So I work at a department called Google Zoo here in London. Some of you may have heard of us. We are a creative think tank for brands and agencies. And we are cross-platform, which means we're across all of the Google technology. So everything from search, display, YouTube, to augmented reality, Google Maps, machine learning. We're cross-verticals, so we work on automotive, entertainment, food, big brands, basically. Cross-function. So our team is made up of people who, a lot of them have come from advertising backgrounds. So we've got strategists, data analysts, creative technologists, creatives, producers. You get it. Cross borders. So we work across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And we've got departments over in the States and in APAC as well. So I work as a creative technologist. A lot of people might not know what that means. Roughly, I work on creative ideas for brands. I've also got an understanding of technology, so I've got a background in software engineering, so I write code. Sometimes my work looks like that, where I'm in a dark room with code by myself. These days, not so much anymore. And I create prototypes, so tangible things that people can use with their hands and look, rather than just ideas. Okay, enough with the jokes. Let's move on to the serious stuff. Okay, people and brands. So one of the insights that we can see is people are becoming more curious. They want to know things. They want to know about brands. They want to know where products come from. They want to know who makes them. They want to know if people are getting paid equally. People are more demanding. They want more things. They demand more these days. And they want them now. And so what does that mean? That means brands also need to change and adapt to this behavior that humans have. So brands need to be more transparent because we have the internet and we have smartphones and all this information is available at the touch of your fingertips. Brands need to be more available and more immediate. So for example, we have Google Assistant as a platform where you can be sitting at home on your couch and you can just say, okay, Google, sorry if anybody's phones got triggered by that, and ask it a question and it'll give you an answer, right? So it's very immediate. And brands need to be more brave, just like humans need to be more brave. And since brands are made up of people, brands also are becoming more curious, demanding, and impatient. So at Google Zoo, we had to come up with a solution for this. Okay, at Google, with this concept of moonshots, some of you may have heard of this. So there were crazy projects like sending hot air balloons to have Wi-Fi all around the world. Google Glass came out of Google X. But these are big innovation ideas and projects. At Google Zoo, we work with brands and their agencies. And we do this thing that we call roof shots. True innovation is difficult. So how can we efficiently solve brand problems using data, insights, creativity, and technology for humans at scale? There's a concept of design thinking, which many of you would have heard of. And it combines all these different aspects that help us in ideas for brands. You have to create something that's desirable from a human point of view. So you've got to build something that people actually need, something that's actually useful or entertaining in some way. It's got to be technologically feasible. So the answer to it can't be travel back in time in a DeLorean, because that's not technologically feasible yet. And it's got to be economically viable. We have budgets. We have to be realistic. And this process allows people who aren't trained as designers to come up with ideas. At Google, we talk about user first a lot. It's one of our main philosophies. Focus on the user and all else will follow. And this comes from Larry Page, who was a co-founder of Google. And it's very important, and it's at the core of everything that we do. So the creative process sometimes looks like this. And when I was working on these slides, this is definitely how I felt. There's a lot of procrastination. I didn't do the crying part, but there was definitely a lot of panic. I was still changing slides yesterday while I was on the Eurostar on the way back from Paris. And so to avoid procrastination, one of the big things that we do during our process is we tell people to put all their digi distractions away. So no phones and no laptops and no pagers, if anybody still uses those. So the solution we came up with for these curious, demanding, and impatient people is a process we call machine sprints. So this is something that we've kicked off in a full gear this year. And I mentioned scale earlier. And with machine sprints, we're engaging with more and more of our clients, whereas before we were engaging with less clients, but spending more time with them. Now we're engaging with more clients. And so MACHINE is an acronym that stands for mission, audience, challenge, imagine, nutshell, and execution. We cheated a bit with the challenge bit by having the H in there. So this process is based on design thinking and something called the double diamond. Double diamond talks about expansive and reductive thinking. So at the start of it, there's a lot of listening. So the mission comes from the business and the specific marketing challenge they're trying to solve. So we listen to the brands and the creative agency to try and figure out what is the actual problem they're trying to solve. So we call this is the start of the double diamond. And so the next step is audience. So then we have to listen to the audience and look at data that we can get from within Google, so search, YouTube, and any other statistics we can find. And our data analysts and our strategists gather all this data and try and find creative insights. Next, we try and refine the challenge and figure out what is the exact problem we're trying to solve during this process of a MACHINE sprint. And then we get into the ideation. I'll talk more about that since that's kind of the topic for today. So here's a bit more information. It's a very flexible and modular kind of methodology that we've got. We've done anything from a half a day up to 4-day sprint. It really depends on the needs of the client, and it always changes. That's one thing we've learned. Every single MACHINE sprint is different, depending on who's in the room, how much time we've got, and what the brief is. So the insight section of it typically is a day where we gather all this information. And then the second part is the ideation, where we have certain exercises that we run to help people come up with ideas. And the execution, which is a very important part, is where we actually prototype something tangible and then test it in front of a real user. Okay, you might. So this is sleep. So sleep is very important. So I talked about absorbing all this information. So if you spent a whole day listening, it's a lot of information to take in. And so it's very good to go home and have a sleep on it and let all the information sit in your brain and let your subconscious process it and defragment all this information overnight, so that the next day you can come up with great ideas using that information. So who attends these sprints? So we talk about the 3 main different parties. So the client is in there. There might be 4 or 5 of them. It really depends. The creative partner, which could be a creative agency, could be a media partner. It could be a production agency as well. Since I'm a creative technologist, I prefer to have people closer to that end of things, people who are makers, designers, developers, UX specialists. But the most important thing here is to have a different mix of people in the room, because everyone brings a different aspect to the problem to try and solve it. And of course, Google Zoo are in there as well. Here are some traits of creative people that I thought of, and I asked a few of my creative friends. So I come from a creative agency background as well. And some of these I would say are quite obvious, but these are traits that you can learn. Some people are more, you could say they're more creative than others, but it's something that you can learn. Creative people are curious. They seek novelty. They want to try new things all the time. They're easily bored. They're kidults. They're children. I play video games. I play with Lego. This is just part of my behavior. Thinking laterally, thinking differently to other people. There's a great book called Whatever You Think the Opposite. And I love that book. It's so simple, and I love all the stories inside it. Play, draw, dream. We want to be know-it-alls because you never know what piece of information might be useful for your next brief. Constantly learning. This is something I've always had with me. A sense of taste is really important as well to judge a good idea compared to a bad idea. And making things. Making things is very important. That's part of being creative. The word create comes from it. So the tools that we use for these MACHINE sprints kind of look like this. We actually have a suitcase that looks something like that, literally, with Post-it notes and pens and Sharpies and sticky dots and all kinds of things. These are the tools that we use during these MACHINE sprints. It's a bit like Project Runway. It's a bit like MasterChef. It's kind of like a reality TV show where you've got a short amount of time, which is a creative constraint by limiting your time. And we give you, and there's a brief, and by the end of it, you've got to produce something that's tangible. So if you take the example of Project Runway, they're given a brief, they've got materials, they've got budget constraints, time constraints, and they've got to create a piece of clothing by the end of it, and then get judged. And that's also part of our process. So one of the techniques that we use for rapid ideation is called Crazy Eights. This comes from design thinking. So it's very simple. Basically, you take a piece of A3 or A4 paper and you fold it 3 times so that you've got 8 rectangles, and that's why it's called Crazy Eights. This is where you get into an expansive thinking part of the process. So once you have the brief and you've got a clear focus of where you need to focus on, Here's where you generate as many ideas as you can. At this point, it's about volume. You're not necessarily thinking about constraints like budget and time and tech feasibility. It's about getting all your first ideas out. And we do it in 5-minute or 10-minute intervals, depending on the brief. And it's just about getting as many ideas as possible out on paper. One example of creative constraints is the Google Cardboard. So during a time where VR was getting really big and the headsets really expensive and the computers to run them were really expensive, Google came up with Google Cardboard, which is literally just cardboard and plastic and a rubber band. And with that, you have a very cheap VR headset with the addition of a mobile phone, which most people already have. So to me, I found that a really, really great creative idea. Tom Chi, who was a co-founder of Google X, is quoted as saying, "Doing is the best kind of thinking." So prototyping is a very important part of this process. Anybody can come up with ideas. You could be sitting on a bus in the morning and write down an idea. But if you don't take it a bit further and put a sense of craft into it and figure out the rest of it and then try and produce something tangible, then that idea is just lost. So then we get into rapid prototyping. So I spoke about rapid ideation before. We also have rapid prototyping. So we get the right people in the room, and we talk about being scrappy and optimizing for speed. The main goal of these machine sprints is to get from A to B as quickly as possible. So for example, you could use PowerPoint to prototype a website. You don't have to write a single line of code. We've done prototypes for voice-based experiences as well, where it's basically a person talking to another person, holding up a piece of paper in front of their face, so it looks like they're an interface. And then testing is a very important part of prototyping as well. So putting the prototype in front of a user and watching how they behave with it and learning from this experience. So far, we've had really positive feedback from all the different parties involved. As I mentioned before, it's always different, the experiences. There's all kinds of things that can come up. Cultural differences are interesting. So I've been to sprints in Spain, in Italy, in the US, in London, in Sweden, and there are certain differences between different markets. What's been really good is collaboration. Sometimes we get in a room and there might be 20 people there, and some of these people haven't even met each other before, even though they might work in the same company. So that's really interesting. Titles don't really matter. When you're in the sprint, we're all there to come up with ideas, so it doesn't matter what title you have. You could be extremely senior or extremely junior. It's very flexible, so in terms of time, as I mentioned before. Sometimes there are egos in the room, and that's not so good, but we manage. Sometimes we get asked for more tech, and more tech isn't always the answer. It's better to focus on certain technologies rather than showing 50 different technologies with a shallow understanding of each of them. So here's some work I'm going to show you that's come out of Google Zoo. You may have seen some of these that I picked out that I thought would relate to the topic of creativity and humanity. So the first one is from Axe, which you probably have some idea about their previous ad campaigns, maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And so they've had to rebrand and change. And so the idea was, imagine if we answered the real questions that young guys are asking every day. So questions like, is it okay for guys to have long hair? Is it okay for guys to do yoga? Is it okay for guys to wear pink shirts? These are questions that people are typing into Google search. And so Axe took a stand and said, hey, how can we help? So these videos were created, and here's a short case study
Axe
video.
encourages guys to be themselves with Find Your Magic. The research from our NGO partner Promundo showed that society is telling them the opposite.
Pick yourself up. Stop with the emotion.
Don't be a pussy.
Using Google data, we discovered the pattern. Guys were searching online, asking permission to be themselves, and we needed to help. Using the real top-ranked search queries, we first exposed the issue online.
Is it okay to be a virgin? To experiment with other guys?
Is it okay for guys to wear pink?
Which attracted an overwhelming media response. And encouraged everyone to search and see for themselves. And when they did, real guys were there with real answers, posted on their own social channels.
Type of trouser does not determine if you're a man, what type of man you are.
Is it okay for guys to cook? Of course it's okay for guys to cook.
Life is too short to not have long hair.
Yoga doesn't help you become a better boxer, but yoga helps.
For heavier queries, our NGO partners offered support, spreading the word even further. With 92% positive engagement, the campaign started a global conversation about toxic masculinity today.
Society tells me that I should act tough even if I'm sad, even if I'm nervous. I shouldn't show any emotions.
Generating 1.3 billion media impressions in the first 2 weeks. So now, when guys search what it means to be a man, you'll find it's okay to be themselves. Like these little guys from Birmingham.
Is it okay for men and boys to like cooking? Is it okay for men and boys to wear jewelry?
Okay, I want to leave some time for questions at the end, so I'm going to speed through this next 2 case studies. So the first one is from Hostel World, and basically the idea was how do you connect people when they're traveling? So Hostel World is a brand that has a range of hostels around the world. And so they used Google technology to enable translation inside their existing app. And they used an influencer, a comedian, to create some videos to help promote this. And the last case study I wanted to show was the Heiroglyphics Initiative. So this was for Ubisoft, which is a games company, for the game Assassin's Creed. What they used was a machine learning algorithm to translate hieroglyphics. So this is a very new way of using this technology to translate an ancient language that's never been done before. So it's very much for the good of the world. And researchers from Australia found this project, and they're very interested in seeing how it can help them with their actual research that they're doing day to day. So this is a publicly available website where it's crowdsourcing information to get the data to teach the machine how to translate hieroglyphics into English. Okay, Q&A. Anyone? Yes. Yeah, sure. In regards to the Australian researchers, they actually found the project after we had released it and got in contact with us, and then they want to work with us, basically. But if there are external parties that want to be interested, we're more than welcome to speak to them. So at Google Zoo, we don't do any production. We get up to the prototype phase, and the production is always done by another production agency. So we're always open to working with other third parties to help make the actual idea come to life. Yeah. Hope that answers the question.
Hi, I just wondered if your sort of collaboration with the creative agencies and the client, if you found any sort of cultural challenges with that you'd had to sort of deal with, and how you'd sort of just made everybody work together in the best possible way.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we do a lot of setup before these sprints happen as well. We meet with the clients and we meet with the creative agencies, and we make sure everyone's on board before we engage in this process. And the whole idea behind it is it's extremely collaborative. We're just there to help, and we're not going to step on anybody's toes. We're there to assist existing ideas and to 10x them with Google technology. That's a term we use a lot, 10x. Yeah. Cool, I think that's it. Thank you very much.